Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, as Michelle said. We've got a wide audience today. So the good news is we've got information, whether you're a decision maker or one of the technical folks, we've got plenty of information to kind of divulge. And we'll talk about how we are looking at the workspace infrastructure today. And then we'll dive into some of the details about the XENAPP reference architecture that we recently ran to kind of evaluate and get some scalability and some density numbers for you guys that we'll be glad to share with you. As Michelle said, I'm Patrick Brennan. I'm a product marketing manager here at Atlantis, responsible primarily for our solutions marketing. A bit about my background, I previously came from Citrix, where I worked on developing joint solutions as a architect with global systems integrators. And then previously before that, I did IT consulting. So a wide range of different roles throughout my career, but you know, it's very conducive to the topics of the day, where I was primarily focused around VDI, hosted shared apps, desktops, things of that nature. So with that said, we'll just dive right into it. I wanted to give you guys a perspective of what the VDI market actually looks like from an Atlantis perspective. So with Atlantis, there's over 1 million desktops that people log into every day that are actually being powered by an Atlantis solution one way or another. And as the evolution of hyperconverged and VDI has kind of come together, we're actually currently leading the hyperconverged market in the context of VDI, and we even doubled our market share of hyperconverged architectures with VDI year over year from 2014 to 2015. So as you can imagine, the storage market versus your traditional SAN and NAS is going to be the smaller chunk, as that's continuing to grow, however, as people are starting to look and evaluate hyperconverged solutions. But when you compare us against the other hyperconverged solutions that are out there, we are leading the race, you know, very, very much ahead of our competition. So when you look at VDI, it's not necessarily just about the desktop, right? There's a lot of different deployment models, and there's a lot of infrastructure that's required to ultimately support all that. You've got your brokers, you've got the actual applications themselves, you got your VDI desktop, and all the other profile management aspects to support that infrastructure, right? And so VDI has historically had a lot of challenges, you know, with the deployment and various aspects to it. So we'll dive into each one of the main pieces and components that all of us have either seen firsthand and witnessed or gone through those pains, or some of the pains that we've seen or customers have heard about in the marketplace. So complexity has probably been the first and foremost challenge of VDI historically, and it's due not only to the amount of IT infrastructure components involved in order to deliver an optimal solution, but the amount of expertise involved in delivering and maintaining that as well. So architecting it, trying to scale, all those things can be very, very challenging and require a lot of different teams who are experts in storage or, you know, compute, networking, etc., to all collaborate. And sometimes that type of environment, you can be introduced to competing agendas or trying to reduce risks by having a lot more infrastructure to be able to provide a good user experience. And that ultimately came into the next VDI historical challenge, which was cost, right? So in order to acquire enough equipment that was adequate and power enough to deliver a good user experience, it usually required a great amount of upfront capital expense. So in many cases, you would have extensive hours as a result of delivering and implementing all that equipment that were required to deliver that, either with consulting or hiring additional expertise in-house. So not only did you have to buy all these things from storage, servers, networking, everything else, you also had to have the operational expense as well to deliver all that and maintain it long-term. So costs were always one of the huge issues and one of the biggest challenges whenever you're deploying VDI historically. And performance is also related to that, right? Because cost and performance are usually directly correlated with one another. The more performance you get out of the, the hardware and software that you're using, the lower your cost ultimately will be. Sorry. So performance suffered significantly in a lot of VDI deployments because lack of budgeting, the cost was so expensive, there wasn't enough hardware, or perhaps the architecture, the sizing was done improperly. Because again, a lot of these solutions required a lot of expertise and know-how and knowledge into that space. And whenever performance suffers, obviously you've created a poor user experience. So you've got slow boot times, slow logins, slow performing applications, which causes your users to ultimately revolt and not accept the solution. So performance was always one of the biggest challenges, surrounding VDI solutions. And the other thing too is that when you look at VDI, when you take a mission critical, I wouldn't say it's a mission critical app, but it's a mission critical component to a user's productivity every single day, and you put that in the data center, now you suddenly have to make sure that desktop that the user is accessing or their applications are provided in a highly available manner with possibly SLAs or whatever it is that you want to define. And you also needed some sort of disaster recovery plan or something to make sure that the user's data loss was very minimalized. And so protection would always come up as a challenge, because if you're trying to do things like multi-site active-active type scenarios or architectures that are more complex, it could be, again, costly, but also very difficult to actually execute and maintain. And one final thing I'll mention about this as far as the historical challenge is that with performance and cost, you typically you would see issues around people trying to implement this and having that poor user experience, because poor user experience is king in the realm of desktop virtualization, and that was probably one of the other real driving forces around preventing people from adopting or moving forward with VDI. So we'd like to show or talk about today what we at Atlantis here are deeming the next evolution of the virtual workspace. So when you look at VDI, as I mentioned, you've got all these different components of compute, network storage, all these things that are difficult to architect and maintain on their own. So when you look at other solutions out there, as hyperconverged solutions are entering the marketplace, this allows you to essentially combine all those things and simplify the whole process of VDI. There's also other tools and functionality that are out there, but primarily this is the most simplistic type of delivery model for VDI because it's scalable and easy to size and maintain and operate. And so we'll talk about how Atlantis as a whole is delivering a more simplified approach and taking a lot of the challenges that are currently plaguing VDI solutions today. And the way we're doing that is by providing better efficiency. So whether you are adopting Atlantis from a hyperconverged solution perspective or one of our other offerings, which is more of the software-defined storage strategy, you are able to consolidate your data center and use less hardware and infrastructure, which allows you to minimize your physical footprint as well as your real estate space, which consumes more power, cooling, all those things that ultimately take up a lot of space and time to operate. So by doing that, we provide a consolidated data center because we're going to be able to give you more efficiency for the hardware and software that you're using today. So as a result of that, you have less to manage. So with less infrastructure required to deliver that same experience or a better experience, we are effectively allowing you to not have to manage things as much as you used to. And that inherently drives down the cost as a result. So if we're providing more efficiency, the total cost of ownership of this solution requires less overall capital expense to deliver that, as well as the physical footprint, less power, cooling, and all those other things. And also your operational expenses are reduced by alleviating or eliminating the potential implementation and consulting and delivery costs because you're having a more simplified architecture, but also the ongoing operational expenses of managing the environment and just managing less things ultimately results in less expertise and overall people to manage all those things. So we also provide a better experience as a whole. Now, first and foremost, as I mentioned, is that VDI user experience is one of the most important things in order for you to drive adoption. So we provide a better user experience by significantly reducing boot up times, login times, and overall application performance. We make the applications perform much better and reduce the actual launch times of those applications as well. So the user experience goes up dramatically. And when you look at that compared to the existing desktops and laptops that they're using today, we are providing a better experience than what their current end user device is right now. So the idea is kind of the dangling the carrot in front of the end user, right? You want to have them or create an experience for them that they want to use. And so because we're providing a better user experience, users will actually want to use a virtual desktop, especially as you decouple the device from the user, and then it's also a better experience. Why wouldn't you want to use that? You can use your laptop or grandma's laptop or whatever it is that you have and be able to access that same information, applications, or desktops, that virtual workspace, regardless of what device that you ultimately choose to use. And as a result of using less infrastructure, obviously the deployment model gets a lot easier. So again, time to value is much quicker as your deployment models are simplified, and we take all the complexities out of the architecture. As a result of that, it allows you to have also more predictable scalability. So administrators get a better experience because they have a lot less infrastructure to manage, as I mentioned, but also it takes a lot of the guesswork out of having all these different components, different LUNs, different storage, different compute, all these things that present dynamics or risk into a solution, and allows you to simplify all of that and creating an easier, better administrative experience as the business decides to grow and the demand increases. So administrators will also have a much better experience as well, because if you're providing a better user experience in the infrastructure, then you're going to get a lot less help desk calls, a lot less issues about bad desktop experiences, things of that nature. So everybody wins from a user perspective as well as administrator perspective. You get a better experience overall. And then when we talk about the protection, you get better protection whenever you're using Atlantis as well, because we provide enterprise availability with our offerings. So like I said, desktops that are put into the data center suddenly become a mission critical application, and it's something that you need to provide, something that's highly available in order for your users to stay productive and be able to inherently provide all the benefits of a virtual workspace and decouple that device. You need to make sure that that's readily available, and we provide that with little to no downtime thanks to our sophisticated data services that Atlantis provides. And we also allow you the capability to have that multi-site resiliency or backup, or whether it's HA, like I said, multi-site, or DR, a simple backup and restoration continuity plan. We can meet those challenges more efficiently with, again, less hardware because of the value that Atlantis is bringing to the table. So a lot of those challenges before previously were really hard to do with the technology that was available at the time, just because it just wasn't there, or it just didn't work quite the way it was supposed to. So customers have now the ability to do that thanks to what we're providing. And one other takeaway I like to highlight is the ability to actually save and recover more. So when you think about a desktop, we now have the ability, when we virtualize it and put it into the data center, the ability to now back up that desktop or that VM and take a snapshot of it, and allowing our users that in the event that they were to corrupt their desktop or do something to their desktop that was detrimental, where you had to recover, that's something that was always very painful to resolve from a physical desktop or endpoint perspective. And now we have the ability to do that type of protection, whereas we may not been able to before with the distributed computing model. But as a result of that, that obviously takes up a lot of space, right? So every time I do a snapshot or I back up a VDI desktop, that could take up a considerable amount of space. But with the data services that we're providing, it allows you to take more snapshots, more backups, and be able to recover more. So the point between when a user may do something to their desktop to where the last backup occurred, that window ultimately could be smaller and allow you to make your users not lose as much data as they potentially could have, depending on what type of model that you want to adopt. So we're offering better protection in a lot of variety of ways. So the two offerings that Atlantis has for software-defined storage strategies is Atlantis USX and HyperScale. Now, predominantly, I'm going to be talking about Atlantis HyperScale today because that's what we ran our tests on regarding the XENAPP reference architecture, etc. Excuse me. So with Atlantis USX, I want to touch on what that is. So it's our software-defined storage virtual appliance that can be deployed and allows you to either roll your own or create your own hyperconvert solution if that's what you want to do, or it allows you to repurpose your existing storage that you have. So if you're already married into a 3-year storage solution that you're heavily invested in, and it's not providing or doesn't provide the acceleration and performance that you need to deliver a VDI desktop, USX is a great candidate for front-ending that solution and then still ultimately using your existing storage infrastructure if that's what you want to do. Now with Atlantis HyperScale, it's a simplistic hyperconverged appliance that allows you to slide into your existing environment and be up and running in less than an hour for you to import and run your virtual desktops in. So we'll touch more on the HyperScale portfolio and talk in depth about that. So we have 3 different flavors of HyperScale available today in our portfolio, and we have the CX4, which is a 2-node appliance that has 4 terabytes of storage, and that's more geared towards our remote office, branch office type use cases. I'll talk about scalability of all these different solutions here in just a bit, but that's kind of where we see the CX4 being positioned or leveraged in a lot of customer scenarios. When you look at the CX12, that's a 4-node appliance, and that comes with 12 terabytes of storage, and that allows you to, that's a really good candidate for persistent or non-persistent desktops. When you look at the overall scalability, where we see the bottleneck being when you talk about persistent desktops, it's more on the storage side. So not necessarily the compute. So if you're looking for higher density with greater persistence, the CX24 is a great model for that because you get 24 terabytes of storage with that and still that 4-node appliance. So these are the 3 different flavors that we have available today that can be leveraged. And again, these are all turnkey solutions that you just slide in, and under an hour, you can immediately start bringing in your virtual desktops or your hosted shared application environment into these onto these appliances and start provisioning and running your workload very simplistic, very quickly, with expected level of performance. So as you grow, so let's say you wanted to start with a CX4, for example, you have the ability to actually upgrade that to one of our other models, whether it's a CX12 or a CX24, or you can mix and match. Say you want a CX4, and you acquired that, and then you wanted to add on to the environment. You can mix and match however you'd like, and bring that into your environment and manage all of that. So maybe if you, for example, had a lot of non-persistent desktops and suddenly you wanted to do more of a persistent desktop type play or have that use case solved, you could mix and match CX12 and CX24s to be able to accommodate that use case. So scaling is very, very simple. You just slide it in and off you go running, and you just import your virtual machines and you're good to go. So it's very simplistic in that regard. Now, we realize that a lot of customers are heavily invested into their existing infrastructure for hardware today. So we have basically all the vendors covered. Whether you use a Dell or HP, Lenovo, Cisco, Supermicro, whatever it is that you want, we have the offerings available to you today to use the vendor that you're most comfortable with. So regardless of whichever one of these solutions or which one of these vendors you get or you choose, you'll get the same level of performance, the same density, the same storage capacity out of all of these different various solutions. You choose which one you want. We still provide that same turnkey experience whenever the appliance arrives on site, and you can off you go running with your virtual desktop. And the other thing that's simplistic about all of this is that we are the single throat to choke, if you will. So when you buy a HyperScale appliance from us, there's no need or concern around who supports what. All you have to do is call Atlantis, and we will take care of the appliance for 3 years with a 4-hour parts replacement turnaround, and that's for all the vendor solutions that we support. So that's pretty highly available from a for supportability perspective. But the pricing and everything else that you see includes the support as part of the package. So we've got everything covered from end to end for you to just have a simplistic experience as you deploy HyperScale into your environment. So regarding scalability, right? What does the scalability actually look like for these solutions? And just before we jump into that, for those who are maybe dabbling the first time into VDI for the first experience of this, I just want to touch real briefly on the different models that are out there. So non-persistence is the idea of many different users logging into any number of virtual machines or virtual desktops that are serve up the applications and data for that user, and then whenever they log off, those changes are essentially reset all over again. Now, as far as data persistence, that's usually stored with profile management and other pieces and components of the solution, so that the data for that user will typically stay persistent, but the actual changes to the virtual machine itself typically aren't in that model. And then the persistent model is a dedicated one-to-one, get the same desktop every time. Any changes I make to that virtual machine or that virtual desktop are persistent and stay with that user. So they have the same experience every day with the same applications that they may or may not install. There's a myriad of use cases of why persistence is a desired model for some use cases and customers. And then the hosted shared, which is really what the XENAPP reference architecture that we published is more focused on, which is the many-to-one virtual machine. So there's a lot of inherent benefits to that type of approach, including some additional scalability, but there are some caveats and some trade-offs as well. But it's a great way to deliver various use cases like call centers, things like that, where they may not be very resource intensive. So as it relates to the scalability, I'll just highlight some of the areas where you should pay attention to on this chart. So the CX12, like I said, is probably the best use case for non-persistence because it gives you the highest density as well as the lowest cost for that density. So when you look at a knowledge worker workload, it's about 600 desktops, and then the task worker is more 800 desktops in regards to VDI. However, if you're not looking for that kind of scalability and you're more of a remote office or maybe you're a small to medium-sized level business, the CX4 would provide up to 300 desktops for that task worker workload, or in the 250 range for that knowledge worker workload. So we're getting a lot of scalability on these solutions, and that's again because of the acceleration, the performance, the deduplication that Atlantis is providing underneath the covers that really beefs up the amount of users that you can have on these solutions. So when you look at persistence, obviously storage suddenly becomes more of the bottleneck or one of the key concerns there. So when you look at the density for that, because you're getting more persistent data, you need to have more storage space, obviously. And so the density for that was better geared towards the CX24 to accommodate that storage. So you get about 600 persistent desktops on that 4-node appliance, which is actually quite remarkable, and provides a lot of density for that price point. And then up to 800 if you have more of a task-based worker type workload. And finally, I'll say that when you look at the hosted shared application model, again, that's inherently a non-persistent solution. The CX12 is probably the best fit for that, and you can get over 900 users, which we'll talk about how we achieve that here in just a bit, and then about 450 for the CX4. So again, that's a great use case for that small, medium-sized business, or if you're trying to, place a solution at a remote or branch office where you want to keep support low, you may not have any on-site expertise, but you need to deliver a lot of VDI desktops. A CX4 will be a great fit for that, and also takes up virtually no space, right? Compared to something to deliver 450 desktops in a traditional model may take up 8 U's of rack space, whereas a CX4 only takes up about 2. So it's very, very small in that regard. So this is the thing that's quite remarkable. So this is a mixture of how we got to these price points is a mixture between some of our previous testing. We have some other reference architectures that are out there. So if you haven't had a chance to review those, go to atlantiscomputing.com/hyperscale, and you'll be able to see some of our testing with our non-persistent and persistent VDI desktops, as well as the recently published XENAPP reference architecture that covers basically XENAPP or RDS type workloads for hosted shared desktops or applications. So at that, with the scalability that the HyperScale appliance is providing, that gets you a price point of $92 a user, essentially, starting at that price point. And again, that includes the support, the maintenance, and everything else that I previously mentioned. So if you're moving towards more of a VDI use case, you could still get under $200 a user when you look at a knowledge worker workload for non-persistent VDI, and with persistence a task worker at 157, and then 233 for a knowledge worker workload. So it's and when you look at historically how much VDI used to cost for traditional computing and storage and SAN, it was sometimes 3, 4, 5 times this cost, just due to the amount of complexity and the cost of those storage solutions. Storage typically makes up 50 to 60% of the overall VDI solution costs. So it's very, very key and important that you increase the performance of that, which is what Atlantis does, and provides a lot less. As a result of that, a lot less hardware is needed to deliver that same user experience. So I believe we have a quick poll before we jump into that reference architecture, which is the next section that we're going to jump into. We have a poll that I'd like to get your feedback on, which is the question that is in your poll panel there on the right-hand side is, in what time frame are you considering updating or deploying your VDI project? Is it the next 3, 6, 12 months or more perhaps, or do you have currently no plans at this moment in time? So Michelle, do we need to give them a minute or two? Or can they
it looks like we have the majority of responses in. I think you can move ahead.
Fantastic. Thank you guys for participating in that. Okay. So down to the technical details for those itching at the bit for the technical information. Just to kind of go one click down into what's under the covers for HyperScale. We've got, like I said, 3 different models, but they all share the same server compute today. So we're right now, today in the current models, we're using the 2680 V3, which is a 2.5 gig 12-core processor. So you get 2 of those, 2 sockets, that's 24 cores. And this particular reference architecture, we actually use the CX12 to deliver that. So we used vSphere 5.5 as the underlying hypervisor, and we used 256 gigs of RAM with all the other various components that you see there. And the CX12 comes with 3 800 gig SSDs to deliver the storage capacity that you see for the 12 terabytes. So I also want to give you a logical layout of how the actual architecture is done. So again, this is a hyper-converged appliance, right? So we've got storage that's basically taken and aggregated and allocated across 4 nodes with redundancy. So every time you see the 4, 12, or 24 terabyte number, you're actually that accounts for HA and resiliency. So if you were to lose a node or something happened to one of the drives or something like that in one of the nodes, you have fault tolerance in that number. So we then take that storage and then we allocate that into 3 different volumes. And each one of those volumes is actually 1 terabyte before we actually do our deduplication. So more one-click down in the technology, we are essentially doing our deduplication in line. It's not post-process, which a lot of our vendors and a lot of our competitors out there do post-process. And so we're able to actually provide all this storage I/O acceleration, and I'll get into those numbers here in a bit of what that equated to. But we're doing all that while we're also deduplicating in line. So we're saving you that storage space up front rather than having to throw it out to a cache, or sorry, a cache tier to deduplicate later on in post-process. So while I say a terabyte before deduplication, typically we see 90% plus deduplication for non-persistent VDI or hosted shared applications, and then about 80% or better with persistent VDI. So we're able to really dive deep into the VDI workload and inspect it to determine what are we able to actually deduplicate, and so we get a lot more storage capacity as a result of the technology that we're doing. And inherently inside of that volume, we're providing a lot of performance and acceleration as well. Now the XENAPP servers themselves, I'll talk about, were placed on each one of the 4 nodes. And a lot of you are probably wondering, well, what was the XENAPP VM details and what was the scalability of that? So we did so many different number of iterations of tests to determine what was the sweet spot for the XENAPP VM configuration. We did a lot of VMs, we did a couple of VMs, we did 1 VM, we did different sockets, different vCPUs, cores, everything else. And ultimately, this netted the best scalability was to put 2 XENAPP VMs on each host, which is great because the old way you used to have to do it was a lot of VMs with like 4 virtual CPUs, which increased the amount of management you had to do, number of Windows licenses, all those things, as well as having to patch like all those virtual machines. So we've been actually able to consolidate and get a better density with just having 2 XENAPP VMs per host with 18 cores and only 1 socket. And the reason for 1 socket instead of 2 was the scheduler. When you have 2 sockets for each XENAPP VM, the hypervisor actually starts to overschedule and causes latency as a result of that. So this was really the best way, sweet spot that we saw. And we configured the VM with about 80 gigs of RAM and 120 gigs of disk space. So we had plenty of space for profiles and all those things. Now let's talk about the actual scalability. I want to first talk about VSI base, and I apologize for the car references that I'm about to make, but it's a really easy way to digest what these numbers mean and how to look at them in retrospect. So the VSI base is basically a number that tells you how the system is going to perform before you even get started or do any type of test whatsoever. So the way I like to compare that from a car perspective is if you have a car that's going to have 1,000 horsepower, for example, right? You know that before you turn that key, it's going to be really fast, right? So that's the best way to look at that is the lower the number actually is the way VSI base is calculated. The lower the number, the better. So when you look at 602, it's one of the lowest numbers that I've ever actually witnessed, and I'm sure there may be others out there that are somewhere in that range. But personally, this is the lowest VSI base I've seen, and to kind of put that in comparison to the other solutions that are out there, it's like having a Ferrari versus a Mustang for a sports car kind of example, right? So that's one way to look at the VSI base. So this is a really, really good score, an excellent score to tell you that this system is going to perform really, really well and provide you a lot of scalability. When you look at the VSI max, that is a way to determine what the overall number of desktops or sessions that you can host on this. Now, I realize that your mileage may vary and all those things, but this is like the EPA mileage test, all right? So even though everybody drives differently their vehicle, you need something that allows you to compare results from one solution to the next solution. And this is the best way to do that. So a lot of this test is more of the industry standard for VDI scalability analysis. And when you compare what you're getting here versus some of the other solutions that are out there, especially at this price point, 915 is quite significant. And so we got, like I said, 915 sessions out of this. And if you look there, you'll see that it says that the VSI max was actually not reached. So we still had some additional scalability that we could get out of this. And you're probably wondering, well, why didn't you max the system out, right? Well, I wanted to show you the CPU graph. So the CPU was about 70-75% max utilization on this infrastructure when we ran this test. By the way, for clarity, I should point out that we did run the task worker workload, and the reason for that is because it's very representative of hosted shared desktop and hosted shared application workloads. So it's a really good match for that and doing that analysis. So the CPU utilization was at about 75%, and that gives you some room, some ceiling space, so that in the event that you have a user who has to do some sort of very process-intensive application activities, it allows you to have some space to be able to accommodate for that and have that additional room to execute those without impacting everything else or everybody else that's on that system. And that's pivotal, right? We mentioned previously that user experience is key in all this, and something that's first and foremost what you've got to pay attention to, because otherwise your users aren't going to use this and they're going to reject it. Now, the active memory, you'll see that only 81 gigs was actually consumed for this test. Now, you may have more in your production environment, but the point is that even though we were allocating all that RAM, only 81 gigs of it was actually being consumed by the hypervisor because none of the users were really accessing that. And that has to play a lot into the hosted shared model, where a lot of the memory that users are accessing is actually already being put into RAM inside that virtual machine, so you don't have to keep loading up the same libraries to access certain applications. It's already being leveraged, so it doesn't need to be reused. So there's a lot of benefit to doing it that way. And as you can see, the disk latency was very, very low throughout this, and created a really, really good user experience. So let's talk about the actual storage performance and all this. So when we ran Iometer, it's a tool that allows you to determine basically the number of IOPS that you can expect to see on a given solution. So you'll see that we are demonstrating here that we got 56,000, but that was ran on one of the volumes out of the three. So when you extrapolate that out, that's about almost 170,000 total IOPS. And if you do the math, that's about 185 185 IOPS per desktop. So we're getting this massive density of 915 users per box, while also having 185 IOPS per desktop, which is 3 to 4 times the amount that you could see in a traditional laptop or traditional desktop that users are using today on their end user device. So we're providing, again, a much better user experience because those applications are going to perform faster, load up faster, login times are going to be better, all those things, while still providing that level of density that you saw. And now, obviously, if you were to peel back the density and you wanted to reduce the amount of users that you wanted to put on the actual box, your IOPS per desktop would obviously go up and your applications would be even faster. Now, something also to take away from this is that when we ran this test, we made it so that it's representative of a true VDI workload. Not all IOPS are created equal. So if I was to do a test that said all read, all sequential. For those of you who are very storage savvy, you would know that my IOPS would go through the roof in terms of what I could support and how much what my total IOPS would be. But that's not how a VDI workload actually works. It's more 80% write-heavy type workload and 80% random. And this is one of the things I forgot to mention previously is that, going back to that cost and performance story about complexity issues with VDI, taking a desktop workload and putting it into the data center is not the same as what the server workloads were before. And so, there's a lot more resource I/O intensive aspects to VDI that aren't, inherently with traditional server virtualization. And so that, kind of went into that. So by giving you this level of storage performance with the acceleration that Atlantis is providing under the covers, you're able to get that scalability and reduce that overall cost of the solution and use less LUNs and all the complexity challenges deploying it from a storage perspective to get that number of IOPS. We take care of all of that, and that's how you're able to provide a good user experience as a result of that. So the deduplication, I talked about 90% plus typically for non-persistence. So when we ran the test, we actually were getting about 95% deduplication for the XENAPP servers in this environment. So like I said, we are able to inspect inline as the system is attempting to write those IOPS to the underlying disk subsystem. We're able to inspect that and deduplicate it, and just if it's a write that's already existed, we'll just fingerprint it and say, yep, we already wrote that. We don't need to actually commit the write again, because when you write, you're actually writing multiple times, right? Because you have to account for parity. So you're writing across all of the different drives, across all the different nodes. So one write may turn into actually 10 writes, or it depends on how big your cluster is. But it can get out of control in some regard. So if we're able to inline say, hey, I see you're trying to write that, and then toss the write, we've essentially saved a lot of I/O, and that's how we're able to do that deduplication as well as that performance acceleration. So those are the findings. I really encourage you guys to visit atlantiscomputing.com/hyperscale, and you can download the reference architecture where we go into depth to really explain more about the various performance aspects about the compute, the memory, the disk, all that stuff. All the things that, from a technical perspective, are very interesting and intriguing. And while you're there, I really suggest you guys to look at HyperScale Savings Calculator. Look at the way you're doing things today, and not necessarily from just VDI perspective. Look at it from an overall storage perspective, an overall the way you're deploying your data center today. HyperScale is not just a VDI play. We've got many customers who are using it for their overall, future generation VM server virtualization strategy. So take a look at the savings calculator. You can really determine, what your expected savings rate would be if you were to adopt Atlantis HyperScale, and you can even build out a HyperScale unit on our site with that savings calculator and then request a quote as a result of that. So with that said, I will jump into the Q&A section, but I'll leave this up in the meantime. But as we go through questions, hopefully you guys were kind of asking some questions along the way, but if not, please feel free to use that questions panel over there on your GoToWebinar chat window, and we will make sure we get those addressed for you. So one of the questions was, for prospective customers, how do we provide a POC? So there's actually an ability to request a demo on our site, and if you would like to do that, visit the HyperScale page, and we can accommodate your request and kind of discuss with you the possibility of doing a demo and taking a look at it, and talk through that with you. There's a question about slides. There always is. Regarding slides, we will be posting them in a public forum so that you'll be able to review this information and take a look at it a later juncture. So somebody mentioned this is very interesting information, a great price point. Am I correct in assuming that the appliances are scalable and additional components can be added at any time? So we allow you to. There's definitely certain restrictions as far as what quote unquote additional components are. It has to be able to fit into the bill of materials that we create. So if you want to do like an upgrade from like a CX4 to a CX12, for example, we do allow that, as I mentioned previously, but it's got to be similar, not similar. It has to be the same type of bill of materials that were used previously for the first two nodes to make sure that's representative correctly and that it scales correctly. Now, if you just want to take a CX4 and then add a CX12 into the environment, obviously there's no complexity or anything around those issues. You just simply slide it in and off you're running. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention that part of the 1 hour, up to 1 hour implementation time, simply all it is we ask you a few questions. Obviously not everybody's environment is the same. We ask you a few questions about IPs and some other information, and then we automatically provision and create those volumes and everything else for you so that it's ready to go and you can start importing all that. So as you add in another hyperscale unit to the existing hyperscale infrastructure, we'll ask you those same questions. Are you adding this to an existing hyperscale infrastructure? We'll just add that right in automatically for you. Melvin, I appreciate the flattering comments on some of the presentation material today. There's a comment about Nutanix has a cropless hypervisor in which it makes me save on hypervisors such as Citrix or VMware. Yes, that's true. Nutanix does have their own hypervisor called Acropolis, and we offer today VMware or XenServer. Now, there's free editions of XenServer actually that are out there that you can leverage, which really reduces the overall cost of the solution. But primarily, the market, is driven with VMware as the premier hypervisor that's out there. And so a lot of our customers just want to leverage their existing ELAs for VMware, and you can do that, or as well as reduce the cost of the solution by going with the Citrix hypervisor. There's a question about supporting multiple campuses. So I actually did have a slide on this, and I took it out. If you have an environment where you have a distributed model where you want to put a hyperscale unit on a specific site, you can do that, absolutely. You can have multiple hyperscale units that are distributed at various locations. Now, we even supply the ability to manage them from a single pane of glass, a simple single user interface. So if you import what's known as our USX manager into your, centralized data center, you can have all of your distributed hyperscale units that are at all these different sites brought into a single management UI that allows you to minister all of the hyperscale units from a single pane of glass. So from a management perspective, again, our mantra is simplicity, performance, all those things, and we're trying to make sure that we keep that messaging and that story of simplicity straight, and providing you those tools so that you guys can easily administer the environment, even if it's in a distributed model. So hang tight for me as I read some of these other questions. I apologize for that. Scale out storages by CX models. So the question basically is, are these the only offerings for storage today? Is it CX4, 12, and 24? And as of today, since the initial launch of HyperScale, which occurred last May, these are the three different offerings that we have in the portfolio today. So yes, the CX4, 12, and 24 are our three supported offerings. We obviously, as the product continues to grow in terms of interest and support and things like that, we'll be exploring other avenues as far as how we can supply different types of storage, compute, models, etc. So it's a work in progress, but today those are the three models that we have, and it provides a good flexibility in terms of right storage, right compute for your various workloads. There is a question about GPUs, and it's a good question. I mean, the question basically is how are GPUs going to be handled with hyperconvergence in the future, et cetera. So the good news is we actually have a lot of content that's going to be coming soon about GPU functionality, et cetera. Now, with the hyperscale units today, we do not currently have a solution that covers all of the different vendors and allows you to put a GPU in them, just because these specific models of servers inherently kind of, some of them don't allow that or provide that functionality. So what you can do, however, is, as I mentioned previously with USX, is USX is basically the engine that's powering the Atlantis HyperScale appliance. But you don't necessarily have to use our hyperscale appliance. Now, there's some caveats when you don't do that, such as the simplicity, the turnkey solution, the supportability. All those things are a little bit different of a conversation when you leverage USX. But if you need a solution that has GPU or something like that, and you want to roll your own hyperconverged infrastructure, you can use Atlantis USX to do that. And you can deploy your own, create your own bill of materials, and use Atlantis USX to deploy all that and provide you with the same performance, deduplication, acceleration, and all those things that I mentioned previously earlier, and still, get the benefit that you're looking for, which is, GPUs and hyperconvergence and things like that. Question about Hyper-V support, as we always get. Hyper-V support is coming. We suspect that will be completed sooner rather than later, but it's something that we have been working on with Microsoft on completing and having out the door as another option in our portfolio. What databases are specifically supported with full integration? We have no restriction in terms of what database. So if you're using this outside of the realm of VDI for database workloads, databases are actually a really good use case for hyperscale because of the performance I/O acceleration. So when you use Atlantis USX or hyperscale, we immediately provide a lot more transactions per minute because of the performance that we bring, and that's lines up well with database performance, as it has a lot of demand for a lot of heavy I/O. So with database supportability, we have white papers that we have on our website on the atlantiscomputing.com/hyperscale for SQL, and we'll be adding more soon with things like Splunk and some other type of database solutions. KVM support is a question that's come up. What about KVM support? That's something we're also definitely exploring at this time. It's not something that's available today, but we've definitely had customers share a level of interest about it, and so we are seriously considering doing something in terms of KVM. A lot of good questions, guys. So keep them coming. We've got about 4 more minutes left, so we'll make sure to get through whatever you need. Does hyperscale support VM replications for DR? I will get with you offline about that because I'm not quite sure. I believe so, but I don't want to say the wrong thing and be incorrect. So I have your name, and I will take it offline and email you directly and let you know what the answer to that is. I apologize for not having it. There's a question about encryption. There is currently in the hyperscale portfolio, there's not encryption yet, but it is definitely something that is also being worked into the product. Any other questions before we wrap up? There's a lot of questions coming from Dell. I'll make sure that I'll take it offline with you. By the way, if you guys have any questions, I should have put my contact information up here, but you could just email me. It's patrick.brennan@atlantiscomputing.com, and I could take care of any questions that you guys have ongoing. But like I mentioned, the HyperScale website is definitely a good resource for you guys. But my name's there on the GoToMeeting panel. If you just email me at patrick.brennan@atlantiscomputing.com, I'll be glad to answer any other questions that you have. And for those of you who I didn't get to, I'll be sure to wrap up and provide you a follow-up email for some of those. Cool. All right. Well, I think that wraps things up for today. I appreciate everybody in attendance. Like I said, we'll be providing a recording that's available if you guys need to review this for any other reason, and we'll make sure that we get those slides available to you as well. Thanks for joining, and be sure to visit our site as we have a lot more webinars coming around USX, VDI, all those types of activities. There's a lot of webinars that we're going to be doing over the next few months. So stay tuned for those. A lot of interesting topics coming, a lot, especially around the ones that you guys had questions around today with GPUs, USX, different workloads, all that type of stuff. So we'll have that for you soon, and appreciate you guys and your time.